What we want to do in this chapter is take a look at basically why wireless. It offers us a lot of convenience, but this is a wireless security class. It also offers us a lot of opportunity to have somebody compromise our network. I guess that's really not an opportunity, but it allows others the opportunity to compromise our network. In this chapter, the objectives list the advantages and disadvantages of a wireless local area network. And in this case, we are concerned with local area networks and not wide area wireless. So we're going to look at those. And these are not necessarily the ones that you go and buy for your home, but there are some that become a lot more sophisticated that you use in business. The principles apply, the same principles apply to both. The way you compromise wireless is going to be the same for both. Describe the functions of a wireless LAN standards and the regulatory agencies. Wireless networking security configurations, we'll not spend a lot of time with that. The book that I'm using here, Champa's Wireless Security, also wrote a CWNA book, which is one of the wireless certifications. Cisco has some wireless certifications. There are a number of wireless certifications that are available to you should you choose to do that. Define information security and tell why it's important in wireless networks. And hopefully you have heard, read, or whatever about wireless, compromising wireless, and why is it so vulnerable. The reason it's so vulnerable is, unlike a wired network, you can't lock the door and keep somebody out. Unlike, well, you can put cages around them to prevent the wireless signals from going out. But generally speaking, once the wireless signal is there, it is there, and you can't do a whole lot about it. List of 5 types of IEEE wireless local area networks. LAN applications, and this one can be found in every industry whose employees need or want to conduct business without being confined to a specific location. Typically, our desktops are going to be in place. I remember not too many years ago when hotels started offering internet access. A number of them were wired. The thing that happened with the wired was that the hotel didn't provide the patch cord, so you had to bring your own. If you didn't bring your own, you just didn't get there. In order to put those drops in, they would have to go through the walls or put them in while the hotel was under construction. Under construction, obviously a much easier time to do that. If you have to go back and run the wire, it makes for a pretty big expense to do that, and it takes quite a bit of time to do that. If we put in our wireless access points, get the broadcasts distances correct for them, and then we can have access in a whole hotel in a relatively short period of time. Same thing applies to the house or to a business. If we're going to do wired access, we've got to put in the drops. We have to put the wires from wherever to wherever. Same thing in business. And if business is in one of the older buildings, maybe that has 24-inch cement walls, it becomes a whole different issue of putting the wires into the walls, through the walls, around the walls. Can affect the wireless also. We can put in some relays in order to help us out in that situation. In business, flatter organizations. The employees are involved in team meetings that occur away from their desks. And I think one of the examples that he uses in there is you go into the conference room in the old days and people would bring their laptops, bring the computers, and would have to use a wired connection. Whoever got there first with a patch cord got the wired connection. So we had a limited number of access, and they had wires running all over the place, and I guess maybe tripping people and doing those sorts of things. So that we have kind of an issue with wired. Wired is going to be more secure because, again, we can close the door, lock the door, and keep the people away from the wired access. It also is generally going to be faster than a wireless network, just simply based on the way that it handles the technology. But flatter organizations, lots of meetings, people can then get on to the wireless network and have access to the information that they need, the data that they need during the meetings. They don't have to wait for somebody to go get the information, come back, delay the meeting. You can continue to go. Has changed how and where business meetings can take place. When we can do them about anywhere. You can do it at McDonald's or Starbucks if you really wanted to with the wireless access points. It also helps that people can be in a lot of different locations and still attend the meeting, still get to the meeting. If somebody is on travel, they can use the wireless access at the hotel, for instance, to join a virtual meeting room and be able to take part in the meeting that's going on at the headquarters activities. And contention here has made meetings more focused and more productive, and in general, that should be the case. Wireless LANs increase productivity, time, and financial savings because back to the meetings, we don't have to bring the wires, we don't have to put in the wired access. We can have a system up and running in a relatively short period of time simply by putting it in the location that we want and then having access through a wireless access point. The problem, issue, the things that you have to consider, and again, this is a security class, is what are the security implications of it, if there are security implications of it. Voice over wireless LAN is an emerging wireless technology. I think it probably has emerged to some extent. Uses the existing data wireless local area network to make and receive telephone calls. That means that you can take the phone with you as long as you're on a wireless local area network. And you're not talking about cellular going in and out and doing those sorts of things. We are actually connected to the network and can use those phones on the wireless local area network. A voice wireless local area network might look something like this. One of the other advantages is that you can get locational data typically on the users from their phones. So we can have lots of different uses for the wireless as we do lots and lots and lots of these things. Get back to the presentation. For business calls, so then and uses the existing data. It can integrate between the voice wireless and the regular phone system, mobile phones, much like voice over IP does. When we look at these things, the businesses, the applications, and why we would use wireless, employee mobility, percentage planning to implement 66%. The things, the applications that you're planning to implement. Conference room access 56, voice over wireless LAN 24%, not a huge number. Asset tracking 22%. We can go and scan the things that we need to look at, and we can have those things. Wired port replacement 21%, and that's something that may become a bigger and bigger and bigger deal as we continue to move into the wireless world, particularly if we can move into the secure wireless world. Travel industry, they've done this for a long time, and we've already referred to some of what goes on in the travel industry. Airports, wireless access hotspots. Airports use wireless technology to keep track of passenger luggage so that we know what goes on. The airplanes themselves are offering wireless access in flight. Hotels have been using wireless for years. Wireless PDAs replace walkie-talkies when we go to those things. To communicate with aircraft once it's parked and taxiing on the ground. The advantage here is with the wireless you can send the updates to the software that actually runs the airplane. So you have access with these things in order to do those things. They're not restricted to airplanes. Education is a pretty big deal for wireless. Give wireless access throughout a college or university campus buildings. not only for now laptops where people can access their educational materials, but also tablets so that you can get ebooks, download ebooks, read books online, all sorts of different things. Ideal, one of the early adopters has been colleges and universities with these things. Wireless local area offers teachers and students an important degree of freedom, can create classroom presentations on their laptops. And again, this one may or may not be significant, quite honestly, because do them on your laptops and then take it with you is what we're talking about here. Can access the school network wirelessly from almost any location. A lot of places already have wired access available at the point of presentation, so that as long as you could get to your home directory, you can still get the information. But it's a nice idea. So we do the presentations on the laptops, and then we access the network again from almost any location within the campus itself. A lot of places publish maps showing the location of the wireless access points. These can be significant because if you're a certain distance away, obviously, and 100 meters is I think, a good rule of thumb for how far a wireless signal goes. You've got to be within a certain range in order to do that. And this shows a map of a building and then where the wireless access points are located around in these things. And what we would want to do is to do surveys so that we have coverage as far as possible from these things, and they're generally going to be in a circle like that. So we have a little bit of overlap here. And how far will these things go? And you're going to do that when you do your wireless survey. And my circles are not great, I know, but where do we have coverage? What is the signal strength? In this area right here, for instance, we have coverage from both access points, but one of them is always going to be stronger than the other one, and the client will tend to access the one that is the strongest. As we go through the course, we'll talk about roaming, so that if we're in this area and we're going across to the next area, that if roaming is enabled, we will automatically shift from this access point to this access point without losing the connection. And that's the difference between actual roaming and just being able to access something is, do you lose the connectivity when you go from one to the other? Do you have to reestablish a session? Education, classrooms fully accessible, computer labs. Colleges no longer have to consider the expense of adding multiple open computer labs. And I think in this case that we're really presuming to a great extent that students are bringing their own wireless devices, and that's where we get into the bring your own device arrangement that is going on right now and causing security people some consternation, although I think that it's kind of calming down a little bit, of how do we keep the network secure with everybody bringing in their own devices. Can be used to promote safety and security. No longer have to consider the expense again of multiple open computer labs because we have wireless access to the systems. Healthcare is a big deal for these things. Healthcare industry, wireless technology to improve patient care. If you go into a hospital now, you see the little wireless carts running around with the probably a tablet. And one of the things that happens today is they scan the medicine so that the correct patient gets the correct medicine, and you don't have the issue to where somebody is given the wrong medicine or the wrong amount of the medicine. Charts can be updated very quickly through the wireless access points, and again, security will be an issue in these things. Allow the staff to access and update patient records immediately. You don't have to have a wired access. You can get onto the network and get the patient information from the access point. And a lot of doctors, I think, are probably using tablets, can use phones, a number of different things, as long as you have taken the proper precautions to protect that information under HIPAA. Verify that, and this is the one, the medicine is being administered correctly. There are advantages and disadvantages, and the wireless LANs are no exception. We've kind of alluded to some of them up to this point. The advantages, mobility, obviously. You can connect to any place within range, as long as you're within range of the wireless network. You can, if you're on cellular, just about anywhere. You can connect wirelessly and have mobility. Individuals who use a laptop that's always in contact with the network, lunchtime break rooms, wireless access points, so that the employees can use their wireless devices during the lunch period to do whatever they want to do, play games, check email, browse the internet, whatever is required. Easier and less expensive to install, by far easier and less expensive to install. Uh, Cabling can be expensive. You've got to get it from point A to point B, and that sometimes is a real significant undertaking. Significant time to install the cabling. Wireless technologies create an office in space where the traditional infrastructure doesn't exist. If we were doing the old hot site, warm site, cold site, if we had a cold site and didn't have any of those kinds of technologies in place, we could probably use the cold site with a wireless technology so that you could then go to the cold site and have it up in much less time than if you were having to go in and rewire it, and you wouldn't have to have it wired in advance. Increased reliability eliminates cable failures and increases the overall reliability of the network. And I think, again, this is probably a matter of opinion. There are a number of things that will interfere with wireless. And if somebody wants to intentionally disturb the signal, it can be jammed relatively easily because they're not high power signals in these things. Cable failures. We have many of our, probably 80-90% of our issues in our network are going to be cable. Did somebody trip over it? Is it properly made? Did you get some corrosion on the connector? All sorts of things. Wireless issue is going to be, as we get into it, typically speed and the way that wireless has to operate, in that each of the transmissions has to be acknowledged. And as we go into the N and the AC releases, the ability to make it a faster network becomes greater and greater. The hot site that we were talking about, hot site, warm site, cold site, office space, but we've got to bring the equipment. If we bring wireless equipment, we can have the system up and running much quicker. I was working in a location, a government location, and the network administrator said, I love this particular manufacturer of servers because all I've got to do is set it up, turn it on, and we're up and running, and it finds its own way onto the network in about 30 minutes. Obviously, you don't want everybody to find their way onto your network, but your own systems, you may want to be able to do that. Disadvantages, radio frequency interference, a number of things, again, interfere with wireless. Microwave ovens, for instance, wireless controllers, the number of devices that use the same frequency band are numerous. And the reason that they're so numerous is that this is an unregulated band, which means that anybody can use it. Advantage of that, anybody can use it. The disadvantage of that is anybody can use it. If somebody makes something that interferes with you, anybody can use it. There's no regulation. You've got to meet some kind of compromise in order to do that. Health risks. High levels of RF can produce biological damage through heating effects. Lots of debate, I guess, on what level, if the lower levels cause any problems or not, we don't really know, but lots of debate, lots of research in that area. That's a could be, couldn't be, maybe isn't when we go through those things. The biggest disadvantage is going to be security and attacks on wireless networks. Denial of service, stealing passwords, alerting messages, putting in rogue access points. all sorts of things that we can do simply because when you put a wireless access point up, wireless is a radio signal. The radio signal is going to go everywhere. If it's an omnidirectional, it's going to go in all directions. We can have uh, directional antennas where we can only allow connectivity or allow the signal, put the signal into specific areas, but anybody that can connect, can receive the radio signal, can receive the transmissions. If we record them and manipulate them, there is a good possibility that we're going to be able to extract the data, extract passwords, extract the access uh, keys in order to get to these things. How to defend a wireless against a wide array of attacks begins with an understanding of what information security is and what are we trying to protect is the first thing that we have to answer. Information security is guarding digital information. That kind of makes sense. Ensures that protective measures are properly implemented, that we have done everything that we can to protect that information. You can't entirely prevent attacks. You can't entirely prevent wired attacks. You can't entirely prevent wireless attacks. If somebody's dedicated enough, they're probably going to get there. What we have to do is set up processes and procedures, policies, so that when they get that information, it's not necessarily going to be advantageous to them. Password policies, for instance, one of the reasons that you change passwords, big reason you change passwords, is not so that we make a password where it's uncrackable because there isn't one. It's so that when we make a password and once it gets compromised, then it's changed, and the cracked password doesn't really do anybody any good. And wireless security, information security is designed and intended to protect information. The characteristics of secure information, the CIA: confidential, integrity, and availability. These are the cornerstones of information security. These are the things that we want to do. And each of those things: confidentiality, keeping it a secret; integrity means that what I sent is what you got. It's the old, I don't know what you heard kind of deal, but did you hear what I said? Is what you transmitted what actually got there? Did somebody intercept it en route and make changes to it? The other is availability, and that's where the denial of service attacks come in. Protects the devices that store, manipulate, and transmit the information. Is achieved through a combination of three entities. The innermost layer consists of products that provide the necessary. The middle layer is the people, and the outermost layer consists of procedures. And we're going to have a diagram here of these things. So the procedures that we would have would be the things that we would do. Procedures out here, organizational security, are going to be our policies and processes. People, personnel security, one of the big deals is training, because a lot of why things get compromised is because we allow them to get compromised. We do it to ourselves. And products, when we do our products, physical security, how are we going to do, what products are we going to use? And in these things we have communications, software, and hardware for each of these things, and they all go together in the CIA, the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of the information. Those are the things that we want to try to do to protect our information. Products, again, be things like antivirus software, firewalls, whatever else, and each of those, the firewall could be either our hardware or a software firewall when we do those things. So people are going to be one of the big things, and training is going to be one of the big issues. Train people what to do, what not to do. Lots of phishing going on. We had a high-level individual in our organization that got an email from, purportedly from IT, that said, the headquarters IT said, hey, we need your credentials. So she sent the credentials. Well, golly, IT doesn't ask her that. Just like if they wanted the credentials, they would change it. If they needed to do something, they just change the password and then tell you, here's your new password. Difficulties in defending as we go through. Speed of attacks, sophistication of attacks. Attackers now detect the weaknesses faster, distributed attacks, and user confusion. What that means is that in the first viruses that we had, the time between detection of the virus and the first exploitation of the virus was, 18 months, 12 months, 14 months. Now, in today's world, the discovery to exploitation time can be a matter of hours or days. So you have to maintain consciousness of what goes on. The computers that we use today are much faster, much more sophisticated. The attacking softwares are much more sophisticated, so that you don't really have to know a lot about networking in many cases. You simply get a program and run the program to do the attack. Script kiddies are what those guys are going to be. Detect weaknesses faster. The faster the computers, the faster scanning is something available to them. One of the more dangerous times for attacking is right after an update has been released. The reason is because once the update's released, the bad guys can go back and reverse engineer it, and then they can go look for machines that haven't been patched. And once you find a machine that hasn't been patched, you know what the patch fixed. You can then attack that machine. Distributed attacks, attacks from many different locations, kind of consolidation of power, a lot of different individuals doing different things. And then user confusion, they're using different things. A distributed attack, lots of different users, machines, sometimes cooperating, sometimes co-opted, doing the same task, trying to do different components of the same task so that it gets done quicker. User confusion, users not necessarily know what is real and what isn't real. Lots of people can't understand that. Why do we keep getting spam emails? The reason is because somebody's clicking on that stuff. Somebody is doing what the attacker wants them to do. Zero-day attacks. These are flaws in the system that haven't been corrected. The attacker discovers and exploits a previously unknown flaw, something that hasn't been corrected, and those are very difficult to do. The unique challenge is unauthorized users can access the network, because in a wireless world, anybody that can receive the RF signal can see the network, can try to get onto the network. If they can get on the network, and in many cases even without getting on the network, you can view the transmitted data. It may or may not be encrypted, but it can be viewed using a scanning software, or something like a Wireshark or a TCP dump through the Linux system. Employers can weaken install security protections, or because it's just too much trouble. TJ Maxx lost, I don't know what, 50 million credit cards simply because they didn't want to upgrade to the next level of security. It's too hard. We don't want users to have to put in a password. We don't want them to have a certificate in order to authenticate their machine. And you're directed to weaken the security. When you weaken the security, you certainly increase the probability of a successful attack. Can easily crack existing wireless security, and in particular WEP. No wireless security is going to be absolutely secure. And again, we go back to who can see this information. And the answer to that is anybody that can get close enough to receive the wireless signal. Once they record the information, once the information is recorded, then we can go and take our time about trying to crack it. The advantage there is typically the keys are going to change, so you can't get access to everything that was transmitted, only that particular one. In many cases, we have session keys, so that if you crack the session key, you have that session and only that session. You can steal personal data, view the wireless transmissions, and inject malware. All of those things can be done. View the wireless transmissions with packet sniffers, absolutely. Can record that information. Wireshark's the one that most of us like to use. The problem with Wireshark is everything's stored in memory, so eventually you're going to fill memory up. You can use something like a TCP dump, and it'll dump it to a file, and you don't have to worry about filling up the memory so that the system will actually stop working. Since it is a wireless system and we can get to it, anybody can get to it, can inject malware into the system. Why security is important? For all the things that we've talked about up to this point. Download harmful content, cause a loss of equipment, violation of the ISP agreement, identify weak link users. Weak link users are those that are going to give away the information. Read an article a few years ago, that some security specialists did a survey in London, England, and somewhere around 50 or 60 or 80% of the people would sell their passwords for a candy bar. So, download harmful content, loss of equipment. Jamming is not all that difficult. I guess you could just run on microwave. Actually, we know what the frequency is. We can just put a stronger signal in there. We can put in our own rogue access point, as long as we talked about a little bit earlier, as long as the signal from my access point, my rogue access point, is stronger than the company's access point, then the users will connect to mine. And then I can watch the information as it goes across the access points. Wireless security is important. We have, in this case here, we show the network perimeter, our protected network. Our protected network is a wired network. Firewall here and a router here to keep people out of the network. But if we set up, somebody decides that they want to run their wireless from someplace else, the next cubicle over or whatever, bring in an access point, plug it into the network, it is then available to anybody that can receive that signal, because probably if they've done something like this, then they're going to set up a whole lot of really good security in order to protect the network. So the attacker is now onto the protected network through the wireless access point. Monitoring for these things really is a big deal. Of course, if you do security, we show a router here, these things are probably going to be in a switch. If you're using layer 2 security, probably would keep this guy from connecting to the wired network in the first place. But those things are going to happen. People are going to put in their own access points. You need to keep monitoring what's going on, what's on your wire, what wireless signals are available in your building. The regulatory agencies, the three primaries, are going to be the IEEE, the Wi-Fi Alliance, and the FCC. Each of these has specific purposes. The IEEE dates back to 1884, establishes the standards for telecommunications. All those 802 standards that we have are IEEE standards. The 802 project, we have wired and wireless in each of those, the technical, educational, professional. This chart's in your book, but the 802.11 is going to be the wireless working group 11A, 54 megabits, 11B, 11 megabits. C, bridge connectors. D, these are ones that we don't hear about a whole lot. Worldwide compliance adds restrictions to a lot of wireless LANs, and on down until to the J, 5 gigahertz signaling. Standards are established by them, and then they just keep going on and on and on. The N, the one that we have recently, it says future. The N's been around for a couple of years now. Uh, 300 megabits, over 300 megabits, depending on how many, generally speaking, how many antennas you have in this thing. The Wi-Fi Alliance is a consortium of wireless equipment manufacturers. What this tells us is that if we buy a wireless NIC and a wireless access point that comply with the Wi-Fi Alliance standards, then they'll work with each other. Early on in wireless, if you bought a D-Link access point, you had to buy a D-Link NIC. They wouldn't work together. But the Wi-Fi Alliance has changed that so that we do have standards so that these things will work together. And the Wi-Fi certified seal, when you go to buy wireless equipment, you want to be sure that it is Wi-Fi certified. I think that in today's world you're not going to find anything that's on the market that isn't something that is compliance. The FCC in the US and each of the governments, the Europeans have their own control agencies. FCC controls the frequency standards for the US. The frequency spectrum that wireless uses, wireless networking uses, 2.4 gigahertz is, and the 5 gigahertz ranges are for the, at 5 gigahertz for the 802.11a and 2.4 for the BGN actually uses both, but those ranges are unregulated frequency spectrum, which means that anybody can use them, anybody can produce things in them. If somebody produces something that interferes with something that you've made, they're unregulated. So that's just one of those too bad so sad sorts of situations. Radio frequency spectrum, lots of different things there. The entire range of frequency divided 450 different sections or bands. When we do those things, licensed exempt spectrum or unregulated bands is the one that we're talking about for the access points that we use. Wireless has become more and more and more prevalent since we went to digital television. The analog band that television previously had has been allotted to wireless communication, and that's one of the things that happened to make it work, it more prevalent in these things. Bands for the wireless LANs, and you can take a look at these. If you when you do testing, they're going to want you to know a little bit about these things. We have industrial ISM, industrial scientific, in the 900 megahertz, and I think the first wireless telephone that I ever had, not cell phone, wireless phone I ever had, was in this band. And then we have the 2.4 gigahertz range, and then what we'll call the 5 gigahertz range. Unlicensed personal and unlicensed national infrastructure, each of these things. And the bandwidth, the total bandwidth of these things, and it is 234, 30, 300 megahertz, 5 gigahertz. What a bandwidth really is, and we always think about bandwidth as the amount of data that we can do, because we talk about what kind of bandwidth that we have on our network. But bandwidth is really the difference between the upper and the lower frequencies in a frequency band. So what this means is that in the 300 megahertz from the low to the high, 5.15 to 5.25, we have 300 megahertz when we ranges when we use these things. That's one of the things that causes in the 2.4 that there are only really 3 distinct channels that can be used in these things because of the overlaps, and you need to check those in your access points to be sure that you're not interfering with each other and you're not interfering with yourself. If you put in multiple access points, like the map that we had earlier had a number of different access points, each of those should be on different channels so that you don't have overlap from one channel to the other, because they will interfere with each other. For wireless standards, the 11, The B, the A, the G, and now the N actually has been approved, has been in use for several years. And AC, I think, is in draft format, should be approved in the relatively near future. The 802.11 AC is going to be something that probably makes wireless much more desirable. We've had speed issues with it. The farther you get away, and it's always going to be the case, the farther you get away from it, the weaker the signal, the slower it's going to be. But 802.11 AC has a theoretical throughput of gigahertz, or gigabit, so that we can have a high-speed wireless network when we do these things. In this one, you can see the age of this book. 802.11 is expected to be approved by 2007, and 802.11 obviously is approved, is in production, and the next, the 802.11 AC, is the one that is next to be approved. This is kind of some history here. Standards, the 802.11, the original 1 and 2 megabits per second. Not really fast, but at the time, not really all that slow. It's when we were talking about a wired network top end speed. We're probably going to be at about 10 megabits per second, and now we're at 10 gigabits per second. Gigabit Ethernet, 10 gigabit Ethernet, keeps getting faster and faster. Specify the way the wireless transmissions could take place in one of two ways: through infrared light or sending radio signals. Infrared is a wireless type that probably isn't used anymore. It's very, very slow. Has a number of issues. Also has a number of advantages, because when we do infrared, it's not going to go everywhere. Infrared's not, for instance, not going to go outside the building. It'll go through windows, but it won't go through walls. Whereas if we use the wireless, it will actually go through the walls, and anybody can get it. So we can use infrared for particular things. Not really used a whole lot anymore because it's very, very, very slow. We focused on the radio signals and not the infrared for the wireless technologies. Generally use infrared specialized transmissions. I think some older remote controls are probably still infrared. Most of those, I think, have gone to wireless, to RF signals. 802.11b. The B and the G, or B and the G, the A and the B started at about the same time. The A is much faster. It was 54 megabits per second. Higher frequency, 5 gigahertz. Shorter distance, but a higher throughput. The B was 5.5 and 11 megabits. What happened when they started to make the chips for these two things is that the silicon for the A wasn't available, so they made the Bs, and people adopted the B standard, and it has been with us ever since. But it's the 2.4 gigahertz lower frequency. The lower the frequency, the slower the data rate's going to be. 802.11b uses the ISM band when we do these things and support wireless devices up to 115 meters, and this is 115 meters with nothing in the way. If you put a cement wall in the middle of it, it's not going to go 115 meters. And the farther you are away from the access point, the slower it gets. So it says devices that are far apart might not be able to communicate at the 11 megabits per second, or whatever the top end speed is for whichever one that you're using. Radio waves decrease in power over distance. The farther away you are, the weaker the signal is going to be. 802.11a, maximum of 54 megabits per second. Also has a 48, 36, 24, 18, 29, and 6 meg. And it uses the uni band. And if you go back and look at the chart that's in the book, and we looked at the frequency bands, the uni band is the one that it uses. There are more channels available in the A standard than there are in the B and G standard. The data rate's higher. The distance is lower, and again, generally the higher the frequency, the shorter the distance, the lower frequency, the greater the distance. Published at the same time. 802.11 products appeared immediately. 802.11a products didn't arrive until 2001 because the silicon wasn't available. It says higher development cost, but That was part of it. The part of it was I just couldn't get it made. Devices are no more than 30 meters apart, 100 feet. So we go 30 meters versus, what was this one up here? They said 115. 100 is the easy number to remember. 115 or 30. So we have a lower data rate. This one is 54 meg, or this one was what, 11 meg. 115 feet or 30 feet, 54 meg. Proprietary 11Gs will do. You can do 54 megabits per second also. 11G says combines the best of A and the B worlds. In this case, G is backward compatible to B. Backward compatible means that yes, they will coexist on the same network, but if you put a B device on your G network, you've just made your network a B network with the B restrictions and the B speeds. Operate entirely in the ESM frequency, the B's and the G's do. 115 meters, 375 feet apart. The 802.11 MIMO, multiple in, multiple output, what this allows, instead of a single signal, is we can have multiple signals, multiple antennas. In the B's and the G's, each packet that is sent has to be acknowledged, and you also have to get permission to send each of these packets. In the 11N, much like we do in Ethernet, where we have a window size, we can consolidate packets and send them and acknowledge a group of packets instead of each one individually. That's going to help with the ability to get a higher throughput on these things. So multiple input, multiple output allows us to have a higher speed, and in many cases, and this is just kind of what I've seen, is they're going to go a little bit further. Standards for the transmissions are expected to exceed 300 megabits per second. They did. Theoretically, you can get 750 meg, maybe a gig. That requires an access point with a number of antennas. I think 6 antennas, which have not really been built. Can be anywhere from 300 to 600 megabits per second, which is substantially greater than the 54 meg for the A standard and the 11 for the B standard, the G standard. So transition to the N standard, the AC standard, is going to give us speeds up to a gigabit per second, the theoretical gigabit per second. Each of these things, the A and the G, here we have both at 54 meg. The N, 300 plus meg. B, 11. And remember, and we have ISM, the A standard is the only one that runs on the uni, in the uni band. The 802.11n actually works on both the 5 gig and the 2.4 gigahertz spectrum. So it uses dual channel, multi-channel, dual channel in order to do that. Also, it's going to use a wider bandwidth. Instead of 20 meg, it'll go up to a 40 meg. So that as long as nobody else is on there, if somebody else comes in, it will actually compress its bandwidth. So the greater the bandwidth, the more information that we can put into something. Bandwidth, I guess you kind of think about maybe if you had a trailer, if you had a really big trailer, you can put more stuff in it than a shorter trailer. Bandwidth, similar sort of circumstance. Wireless certifications. I'm going to basically click through these. CWNP, CWNA, CWSP, CWAN, CWNE, CWNT. A number of wireless certifications are available from a number of different vendors if you're interested in doing those. RTAC, and again another set of wireless. NARTE, wireless installer technician and wireless installer engineer, and there's a number of jobs that you have to have FCC certification, wireless certification in order to do those jobs. Cisco has their own, like I said, a number of different vendors that do wireless certification. So what we really talked about, wireless can be found in almost any industry. It makes things simpler but doesn't necessarily do anything for our security. Several advantages and disadvantages. The advantage is easy to set up. We can put a network up in a wireless environment almost instantaneously. We one time got a bunch of machines in. They said, "Hey, we want all these machines set up in this classroom by Monday morning," and this was like Saturday morning. We didn't have any drops in the room. So how long is it going to take us to run all of the wired access to this room? The computers came with wireless NICs, so in order to get the room up and running quickly, we configured a wireless access point in the room and then ran it back to the NOC, to the switch in the NOC, so that we had that room up and running in a couple hours because of the wireless capability. Eventually we put wired access into the room, but that gave us the breathing room, the temporary installation in order to do that. Challenges: unauthorized users accessing the network, viewing the transmitted data, people that you don't want to see that, employees installing rogue access points, and this goes back to a type of security that we forget about an awful lot, the layer 2 security. I'm not doing a real good job of making these letters here. I'm doing it with my mouse. Layer 2 security can keep those off of your network. Weaknesses of older wireless security defenses, and in particular WEP, insecure. The newer ones are better. There is no system that is uncrackable. The regulatory bodies, the IEEE, the Wi-Fi Alliance, and the FCC. Wi-Fi Alliance creates the standards, and everything that you have should be a part of that. It says 4, we also need the N in here so that we have the standards that have been approved. Advantages and disadvantages of each of those standards we looked at a little bit. The speeds, and the speeds are going to be the thing that we really are probably concerned with, because the security, we can generally use the same security for each of these systems. With that, thanks for listening.